This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 605, entitled Most Manospherians Don't See the Big Picture. Description. This flyer complains that the majority of Manospherians do not see the big gender political picture, that is, the critical importance of the FIPping of women, the creation of a FIP Society, the creation of the GECs, GECs, Gender Equality Committees in the parliaments, so that most of the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men can be removed. Now the flyer itself. Most Manospherians don't see the big picture, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. As a masculist, I get frustrated that most of the men in the manosphere don't see the big picture of what the masculists are aiming towards. So this flyer is aimed at spelling out clearly just what that big picture is. Most Manospherians are into psychology, talking about how unpleasant modern women are and the like, which strikes me as rather shallow-minded compared to the big historical sweep that masculism will usher into humanity over the next few decades. So, what is the big picture? In the current world, most men are man-slaves to women, billions of them, working for women for decades of their lives, and then get divorce-raped with one chance in 4. Which is a monstrosity for masculists, since all this is so unnecessary, given that women now, thanks to men, have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral duty to FIP up and pull their financial weight, so that billions of men are not man-slaved and are not divorce-raped, since in the world that the masculists are aiming to create, all women are FIPs, who are career competent and expect, as a moral duty, to not live off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life. I get particularly annoyed by black Manospherians in the US who utterly fail to see the above vision. The US population consists of 13% blacks who are dumber on average than whites by 15 IQ points, a whole standard deviation. The proportion of black Manospherians is disproportionately high given their population size, which sounds good for the manosphere, but their opinions are stupid in many cases. For example, often I hear the statement from them, quote, that men don't care about a woman's career. They just want a woman to be young and hot. End quote. This opinion is very unmasculist and seems just plain dumb to masculists, since the primary political aim of the masculists is to free men, to liberate men from decades of manslavery, to fluffy, manslaving, divorce-raping, vermin, parasites. To do that, women have to be FIPped, forced by men, to have career-competent educations at high school and college, so they can be FIPs as adults and not expect, fluffy style, to live off the money and labour of a man, thus slaving him, manslaving him, and in one case in 4 if married fathers, divorce-raping him. Masculists have a hatred of such gender criminal women who commit these horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes and punish them severely by effectively exterminating them, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that, as most men become masculisted, these fluffy women rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected both socially and sexually, spat at. Masculists are abolitionists, seeing fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. The Masculists are at war against fluffies and fluffy feminists and aim to wipe them off the face of the earth by forcing them into a slow, miserable death, rotting on the shelf due to their manlessness. Already, a third of middle-aged women live alone, manless, childless, feeling utterly depressed and on antidepressant drugs. To have one's masculine consciousness raised means essentially to see fluffydom as manslavery, and hence a war issue to masculists who express their hatred at these gender criminal women who commit these horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. To free men from manslavery, women need to be FIPped, and to do that, men need to be masculisted, who place enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, or be effectively exterminated by masculists forced to rot on the shelf. Thus the importance of the FIPping of women to masculists is critical and obvious, but not yet to the majority of Manospherians who are still stuck in the psychology phase of men's lib, complaining about the psychological traits of modern feministed women, rather than pushing politically for the men-fairing of the gender laws, so that men can be freed from the major ways that women oppress men, and for decades the big three ways being women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. Masculists look on MGTOWs as political wimps who selfishly don't care about the gender plight of other men, who just quietly walk away from marriage and paternity. Of course, masculists are aware that if millions of men go MGTOW, then obviously that will have a profound impact on society, as millions of fluffy women won't be able to get their financial claws into some stupid, ignorant, man-slavable man, since so many men, MGTOW style, have decided that marriage sucks for men, and that divorce is so toxic for men, thanks to the takeover of the divorce courts by feminists in the 70s, that marriage and paternity have been made toxic for men. So millions of young men now reject both, preferring to spend their money on themselves. To masculists, the MGTOW movement is a good thing, in the sense that it forces women to FIP up, since if women don't FIP up and become manless due to the man strike by MGTOWs, then these fluffy women will be poor. So will be forced to FIP up if they want to have a halfway decent standard of living. But for the masculists, this is only half the story. To masculists, the MGTOWs lack political vision and are gutless, hence are labelled apolitical wimps. It's not enough for millions of men to go MGTOW passively. Masculists are fighters who are out to change society by putting tremendous moral pressure on women to get off their fat, parasitic asses, in brackets. In a few years, half of American women will be obese, with similar stats in many other countries, close brackets, and FIP up so that they are not fluffy vermin, that is manslavers and divorce rapists, and hence hated by the masculists who aim to wipe them off the face of the earth. To free men, millions and later billions of men, from manslavery and divorce rape, two of the worst gender crimes that women commit against men, it should be obvious to anyone who thinks about it that women need to be FIPped, and that will require millions of men becoming masculisted and seeing the big picture, that the FIPping of women is a precondition for men to be free from manslavery and divorce rape. Once women are FIPped universally, then the divorce courts can operate effectively under the principle of financial independence, so that there is no alimony, that child custody is made joint by default, that both parents share equally the costs of raising the kids, no halving of wealth and stuff, as is the case today in many countries, which butcher one father in four. Masculists are so enraged by the butchery that occurs to one father in four in the hated fluffy feminist hypocrite genocider controlled divorce courts that they are at war against these fluffies and fluffy feminists, and in practice exterminate them by totally ignoring them and spitting in their faces for their gender criminality. Masculists are full of anger and hatred at what is currently happening to men and are out to change society so that it no longer happens by changing the big political picture by the creation of a FIP Society, capital F, capital S, where both sexes, particularly young women, are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to FIP up and pull their financial weight, to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives and not expect, like a hated bloody fluffy, to live off the money and labour of a man, manslaving and divorce raping him for decades. Masculists want the gender laws men feared via the establishment of GECs in the parliaments. GEC equals Gender Equality Committee. That consists half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is definitely not the case today. If monoconscious feminists complain about this equal distribution of time, money and effort to free both sexes, then the masculists will attack the hypocrisy of these MFBs, monoconscious feminazi bigots, with particular verbal viciousness, biting the fucking heads off these monoconscious, hypocritical, bigoted feminazi cunts and wipe them off the face of the earth by utterly rejecting them the same way masculists do to fluffies. These GECs will then menfair the gender laws, thoroughly reforming the divorce courts, pushing for the FIPping of women, legislating the that's paternity rejection right, so that men have the same legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women have. Those women who object to this, seeing men as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, will have their fucking heads bitten off by hateful, verbally vicious, militant masculists who will spit at these feminazi hypocrites who have one rule for women, that is the mara, aka abortion right, but no para for men, the most blatant example of sexual discrimination that exists. The GECs will also legislate the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to block women's paternity fraud, one of the greatest of all gender crimes against men, manslaving him for decades of his life to pay for a kid in capital letters that is not even his. All of these gender reforms presuppose the FIPping of women, so it's not surprising that masculist theorists like myself place such emphasis on the importance of the FIPping of women, so that all the other masculist reforms can realistically take place. This is the big picture that the masculists envision, that most of the Manospherians do not see. They lack vision. They lack political will. They are not masculists. They need to be educated by the masculists, taught that merely MGTOWing is only half the story. Men need to be structurally, politically, publicly liberated from their traditional role of being a manslave to women, working for women for decades of their lives. Masculists are abolitionists who are at war against fluffies, who manslave them and divorce rape them in massive numbers. This is a war issue to masculists, which is why we masculists aim to kill off our gender political enemies, that is the fluffies and the fluffy feminists, by exterminating them slowly, expressing our masculinist hatred for women who commit these horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. Such women deserve to die their slow, miserable deaths as caused by masculists who have nothing to do with them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at, which is a veritable mantra for the masculists. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 600 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.